All right, so I think this is recording. Let's take a look at this word problem. It's a uniform motion problem. A pilot takes a trip to visit relatives and travels there at a speed of 100 miles per hour. On the way home, the pilot travels 80 miles per hour. If the round trip, that should say took, if the round trip took 9 hours, how far did the pilot travel to visit her relatives? All right, so let's make a sketch here. Um, we have home and we're flying. And so here's our plane and we're going really fast. All right. The rate to to see her relatives is 100 miles per hour. And then here say is the relatives. And once you visited the relatives, you turn around and fly home. And the rate that we're flying to go home is 80 miles per hour. The length of time that we're flying to go see the relatives, well, let's let that be our unknown. Let's let that be x. If I wanted to, I could let it be t for time, but I'm just going to let it be x. The time to return home, we know the total trip was 9 hours. So if it took x hours to get there, then the remaining time, 9 minus x, is what it takes to get home. And this is in hours. All right. So the distance from home to see the relatives is the same as the distance to see as going from the relatives to home. So that's what that's what we recognize that's equal here. That's the relationship. I got these old, I don't know why I accidentally hit that. Let's see. I want to shrink this up is what I meant to hit. So I know that the idea here with the uniform motion, my relationship is distance is equal to rate times time. So the distance to go see the relatives is the same distance that we travel to go home again. So we know distance is equal to rate times time. We want to take the rate times the time from the picture of us going to see the relatives, and here the rate times the time go back home. So the rate here was 100. And we said we were going to let x be the length of time that it takes to travel, the length of time it took to travel to see the relatives. On the way returning home, we were flying slower at 80 miles per hour, and the length of time that it took to fly home, was 9 minus x. All right, so let's solve this. This is the same way I did problem number 2. There's other ways that you can do it. Maybe I should have tried to look to see to let let x be the distance and tackle it that way, but to me this just seemed easiest. All right, so I've got 100x is equal to 720 minus 80x. If I subtract 80 from each side, I've got 20x is equal to 720, and the x is equal to 36. Now, 36, boy, does not make sense at all. Right. Mess up. What? Huh. Well, x represented the length of time. That can't be right, because the total trip was only 9 hours. So how could it take 36 hours to get there? Distance is equal to rate times time. Oh, look, I'm supposed to add 80x to each side, and over here, I see, sorry about this. I'm not going to make a new video just to, look here, if I add 80x to each side, you probably saw it, but I didn't. I've got 180 times x is equal to 720, and x is equal to 4, right? Yeah, that's a much more reasonable answer, that it took 4 hours to fly from home to the relatives. So we know that it took 5 hours then to fly back, but that's not what that's asking. It's asking for the distance. It's asking for the distance. So let's look back at our equation, because the left-hand side and the right-hand side represented the distance. So it doesn't matter where I plug x back in. If I plug it in over here on the left-hand side, 100 times 4 gives me 400. If I plug it in on the right-hand side, 9 minus 4 gives me 5, and 80 times 5 is also 400. So 100 times x is 400, and that represents miles. And that's our final answer, that the how far did the pilot travel? The pilot traveled 400 miles. Some type of a summary. Your writing skills are better than mine. Your sentence is going to be better than mine. All right, so hey, I hope that helps. Sorry about the mistake there, but that also illustrates to pay attention to what you're doing and stuff. I mean, clearly I wasn't paying enough attention to what I was doing, but also when you get an answer and stuff, make sure that you check to see if it's reasonable. 36 hours was completely unreasonable, because we knew the total time was 9 hours. All right, so hey, I hope that helps. I'll talk to you later. Bye.